Welcome to this special HR expert panel event for your career growth. I'm Erin Urban. I'm your host today. I'm very excited to bring this special event powered by the Career Coffee Chat Show and CoachyUrban.com. Now, if you've never seen my smiling face before, my name is Erin Urban. I'm an executive coach, and what I do is I help emerging and evolving leaders remove those pesky roadblocks that block them from achieving more impact, influence, and income. Today, we'll be focusing on the future of work, remote work, and what does the great resignation mean to you and your career growth. So, if you ever wondered, what does this future of work look like for me, and how is remote work going to affect my career advancement, you're in the right place. We'll be talking about how you can position yourself wisely for career advancement and what's to come in the ever changing world of work. Knowing how remote work will affect your ability to move up, what you can negotiate and what you can't, and what hiring managers are looking for is essential. So we'll be talking about how you can stand out and what the future holds, how it will impact you, your career growth, and what companies are looking for and how you can stand out. So as you tune in, come on in, join us for this great conversation. We want to hear what you have to say. Please don't be shy. So share with us where you're from, say hi, say your name, say where you're from, and don't be shy about your questions. We're here to help you evolve and elevate in the future of work. Now, who's joining me today? I'm extremely excited. We have two amazing HR experts on our panel today. First off is Yvonne Harris. She's a diversity, equity, inclusion consultant, corporate social responsibility champion, human resources leader, and she's a podcaster. Yay! She's a strategic, results oriented human resources and diversity, equity, inclusion executive who is successful leading teams responsible for recruiting, employee engagement, compensation, and total rewards, organizational development, and training. Now, Julianne Miles is also our other outstanding expert HR panelist. She's the Director of Talent at North America CEVA Logistics and a human resources leader with extensive experience in talent acquisition, university recruiting and relations, and talent development. She's an expert in large-scale program development and process design, helping several multinational companies attract, inspire, and retain the right talent. You'll notice I emphasized retain because right now we're having a little bit of a challenge doing that in our very interesting world of work. So as you tune in, please say hi, say where you're from. We'd love to welcome you to the event and ask your questions. And without further ado, I am very proud to present Yvonne Harris and Julianne Miles. Great to have you on this special event with me. I feel very proud and honored to have you both here to share your insights with the world about what we can expect for the future of work. Now, for both of you, you've probably heard some themes going on right now. It's this tone. What is on people's minds? You feel when it comes to remote work, the future of work, and what's changing because we're in such a strong change cycle. I'm sure you'll both agree with that. So, what do you think, Julia? Would you like to start us off with what you're hearing?
Sure. Certainly all the hashtags, right? So future of work and the great resignation have been coming up and popping up a lot. Certainly in my roles that I've had over the last couple of years, the trends have definitely been shifting. It's a new territory for a lot of people. I think organizations are feeling the difference. Certainly people who work in the HR department are noticing, the changes that have shifted, and then, employees themselves and candidates in the marketplace. So we're all just trying to figure out what to do next. There's a great collaboration of folks out in the HR worlds that talk about, here's what I'm seeing, here's some suggestions and things that we've tried that have worked. So it's been a good time to kind of build your network from an HR perspective as well.
Yvonne, what are you seeing? What's the tone? What's the heartbeat out there right now?
I echo many of Julianne's comments, and I would just say, it's definitely a market for prospective employees, for recruits. So if there's someone who's participating today and they're not excited about their options and their opportunities, they really need to listen. They really need to lean in. The paradigm has shifted. The cheese has moved. And as a candidate, you can now really feel empowered to ask for the things that you want to support your next career move. And as employers, many employers now are much more open to opportunities to be flexible, whether it's hybrid working arrangements and virtual versus in the office. And I know Julianne and I can kind of talk through that. But I would really challenge anyone listening today to write that list of everything they want to see in their next opportunity, because now is the time to start to manifest some of those things.
Right. That's great. I'd love to expand on that theme a little bit, if you don't mind, because that's probably what's on a lot of people's minds. And I want to say hi to Cornelia, tuning in from Spring, Texas. Always great to see you, Cornelia. And as any of you tune in, or if you're just lurking, even if you're watching the replay later or the live cast later on, or the replay or video later on, just reach out to us if you have any questions, okay? Specifically around, let's focus on what are those negotiation points? Because you mentioned remote work. And of course, that's a big thing. A lot of research and studies are showing that people are quitting if they don't feel like they have that flexibility. What other items are you seeing that's on the table that previously maybe weren't necessarily on the table? Either one of you, Julianne, Yvonne, what would you like to tune in?
Definitely the flexibility, I think, is one that's obviously shifted, a lot of hesitancy on before the pandemic. And then obviously now that's become a lot more accessible. People have been proving the last 18 months that they can work remotely. It's interesting, though, because I think the concept of the hybrid model is what everybody thought we were going to land on. And now there's a lot of people who find that that's not working either. So, it's kind of one of these situations where you need to reflect on what works for you and where do you do your best work, whether that's in the office, out of the office, or maybe a mix of both. So in addition to maybe flexibility options, it could be seeking additional certification or additional degree. You've cut out commute time. You've got maybe an extra 2 hours in your day. Devote that to maybe making yourself a little bit more marketable, either internally. Obviously, we would hope that people would stay with their current organization and look for an opportunity within the same company. But there's a lot of certifications that people can be pursuing that they might support the financial aspect of. You don't know until you ask. So thinking about things like that. Paid time off, obviously. A lot of people didn't get to do that last year, just given the environment that we were working in. There's certainly flexibility there. I think the thing to think about is, where does an employer have flexibility to provide additional benefits, whereas things that might be a little bit more structured, like, if you prefer a certain benefits provider over another, that's not something that they can give you. That's kind of a non-negotiable. So really thinking about, what is it that would make your job better? And don't be afraid to ask. The worst thing they're going to do is tell you no.
Right. Good point. And something popped in my mind. I'd love to hear your thoughts, Yvonne, on this, and as well, Julianne. Some people aren't asking. They're just leaving because they feel like their immediate leadership is not supportive and may have demonstrated unsupportive behaviors in the past. And they don't really know who to turn to. So what would you say, if that's the case, which there's a lot of that out there, what would you say to those individuals? What can they do versus just leaving?
Yeah, well, Julianne aptly stated, you never know until you ask, right? Or you don't know the response till you ask. One of the coaching points that I've given, some that I've mentored throughout, the years of my career, is that when you do go for an ask, Erin, as you know, it's not always what you say, it's how you say it. And I would say in this moment in time, don't go in and ask for one thing, ask for options. Like if I go in, I ask for 5 things and I get 2, I still got 2 things that I didn't have when I came into that meeting. So whether you're, looking to reshape the relationship with your current employer, or you're meeting with a prospective employer, what's your list? What's your personal what's in it for me list? And sticking to that term of flexibility. Employers now are much more flexible in listening and wanting to respond and seeing if they can support different asks. But if I go in for one thing and the answer is no, well, I didn't get anything then from that particular meeting. So let me just put my list together. And whether it's working from home, Julianne, I agree with you. Some people are over this work from home thing. Many people want to get back into the office. I think it's tied more to flexibility and just how I flex my work and my life. People are connected now a lot more than they've ever been. But if I want to take my lunch at 2:00, I just want to have that flexibility with this work environment to do that. So those are the types of things that I encourage people to really think through and go for a comprehensive ask list.
That's great information. Thank you, Yvonne, for sharing that, because you're absolutely right. When I coach clients in negotiation, I tell them to ask for a little bit more than they expected to get,
Right.
because that allows some wiggle room. Because if you come in with a low ball number, well, that's what you're going to get, probably.
Yeah.
But if you ask for a range and that low ball number is more like what you really want, then it's more likely for you to you actually get that range, if you will. I'll say hi to Tracy tuning in from Texas, and hi to Colleen tuning in from San Antonio, Texas. Great to see both of you today. So, Julianne, what do you think about what Yvonne shared as far as what's on the table that maybe previously wasn't on the table pre-2000?
Well, and I definitely see this from the aspect of, people are leaving before they're asking, which I think is an important point that we need to make sure that, me as an HR person, we're considering, because it's so much better to retain that person and give them the little ask that they might have than to have to start all over. And then you've lost all that tribal knowledge, if you will, that the person had, regarding your organization. So, if you're out there and you're considering, okay, I'm not happy in my current role for whatever reason, it's not challenging you, it's not what you want to do, you don't have the flexibility that you'd like, is spend some time thinking about what do you want, to Yvonne's point. Nobody owns your career but you. You're responsible for your trajectory within the organization. Building a relationship with somebody internally to kind of be your mentor, whether it's your manager or somebody else, can kind of be that guide, helping you navigate. But at the end of the day, the only person who's motivated to achieve success is you, right? So having that self-reflection of, what do I want to do? What do I enjoy? What am I not enjoying? And then work with that person that you have that relationship with internally to figure out, okay, how do I turn that into goals? And then how do I achieve those goals? And if the goal is, if you're working in role X and you really would rather be working in role Y, what do you need to do to get to that role Y?
Right.
Developmentally, right? Is there a skill that you're lacking? Are there experiences that you really need to be exposed to? And then those may be your asks, right? So you're not necessarily asking for, I need more money, I want more time off, I want to work from home. It's, can I get exposed to a project that's going to allow me to learn something new, gain a new experience, broaden my capability so that eventually I'm now capable to move to that role Y. And I think that's an important thing to note too. Don't assume you have to leave a company to try something else out. The organizations want to retain their employees, so they're more likely to work with you to accomplish that. You just have to ask the question.
Well, and Julianne, what's interesting is, as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking it through it from the employee perspective. But I would also say, if there's an HR leader or a talent acquisition leader that's listening to this broadcast, you can take everything that you just said and walk through it in a different way. Engage your employees before you're leaving with them. Have that steak interview. What is it that you need in this season in your life? What are the wish list items for you developmentally? How is your schedule working? How can I flex better with you? So the conversation can happen either way, but instead of waiting for that person to get the next offer or to be in the marketplace looking, why not have the conversation now?
Right. I mean, I think it's an HR person's worst nightmare to have these conversations after the other person has an offer in their hand, right? You don't want the candidate to get to that point. And I think a lot of organizations struggle with that. The transparency between what the employee desires, what the gap is to get there, and how can the organization support that internal mobility is a challenge, because organizations have lots of people. And how do you document? How do you report on it? How do I know if somebody's mobile? If I've got a position open, across the country and I want to look at the organization to find out where that talent might sit internally, what's the best way to do that? So I think that there's, obviously things companies can be doing to support that, to ensure that those employees know of the opportunities more than just voicing it to their manager. How do we make sure that it's widely communicated and understood?
Exactly.
Yeah. And I don't know about how you ladies feel. I mean, my leadership hat really quick. I'm a very strong proponent of leadership being involved in professional development plans. We're not talking about PIPs here. We're talking about development, helping develop their teams. And without that conversation, that's not so tell me about your projects. It's not an action report meeting. It's a developmental meeting. What do you want to accomplish? What strengths would you like to focus on? And most importantly, having some sort of strengths assessments that they can leverage to help these individuals develop a career plan that works for them within the organization without them having to leave. And with these types of conversations, if those can be documented in a way that's supporting the overall organizational development platform, that's gold. And it's not really happening. And that's the problem. And that's one reason why, in my humble opinion, we're seeing part of this great resignation, because people just haven't felt supported. They haven't. There's been a couple of research, which I'll be happy to pull up and speak numbers. But I think it's a lady, I forget, she was over O&D and for Hulu, and she ran numbers on why people were stressed and burned out. And she said, well, they feel stretched too thin, and they didn't feel like they had meaning. That's a problem, right? But back to your point about asking before you leave. I feel like a lot of employees don't feel empowered to do that. And what would you say to them?
I think you have to build that trust within your circle, right? Within an organization. And again, like I said, whether it's a manager or it's a mentor, you need to find somebody that you can have these conversations with. I know a lot of organizations do performance management down, right, as they filter through the organization, and you talk about goals and development areas, etc., as part of the structure within a company. And I think it's up to the employee to really push up a little bit on making that more meaningful. And that's difficult to do in a work environment, because you're no longer able to just drop into somebody's office and be like, hey, I had a quick question. What do you think about blah, 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 blah? Or, I've been really thinking about, pursuing, expanding my experience in XYZ area within this company. Who could I reach out to talk, start a conversation, have, some initial discussions about that. It's hard to do that when you're at home sitting by yourself behind a desk. So I think it's going to require people to really consciously make those efforts, schedule time with your boss. And I was having a conversation with a young lady I was mentoring in my last organization. And I said, this is outside your normal one-on-one, right? Where you're reviewing the work tasks that you've done for the last week. Here's where I'm at on project A. Here's where I'm at on project B. This needs to be a separate conversation to say, here's what I'm thinking, and here's what I'm thinking, long-term, short-term, whatever it might be about my career. Right. Do you see any gaps? What can you help me understand about how I get there? It needs to be separated from the normal one-on-one. But again, the driver has to be the employee.
Mm-hmm. Yvonne, would you agree with that? Yeah.
I totally agree. And I would just add to it, though, that before you can even engage Julianne as an HR director and leader in the conversation, you've got to get clear on what it is that you want. What are your goals? What are your asks? And if you haven't been asked the question in a long time, I think, Erin, a basic premise is that we're just saying, okay, everyone's walking around with their goal sheet. And that's not necessarily the case. A family member of mine just asked me recently what were my goals in a certain space in my life. And I'm so glad that he did, because I couldn't articulate it in the moment. And it was a gift for me to say, okay, I really have to get clear on this particular area in my life if I want to have the intended outcomes. So, again, for those who are listening today, your manager probably does have your best interests at heart, would love to engage you in a conversation like this, but you've got to be organized. You've got to be clear. You have to have your list. You have to have your whys. But just to walk in, like Julianne, you're saying, hey, can I get a minute of your time? Or can we chat about this? That's not how you approach this conversation. It has to be scheduled, and it has to be more thoughtful.
Yeah.
Very good point. Yeah. Julianne, were you going to say something?
No, I was just nodding my head in agreement. Yes, Yvonne, I agree.
Yeah. Yes. We're all in agreement. Yeah. I mean, it's a couple things I've heard so far are, number one, don't just leave. At least have the conversation. And I'd love to circle back a little bit to those people, because there's a lot of this case. I hear it so much. I know it's out there, just in my segment of the population that I serve and interface with. Where they don't feel comfortable talking to their boss because there's a fear-based leadership, right? I like to circle back to that. But what I've heard so far is don't just leave. At least have the conversation before you get another offer in your hand, because that is what I hear the most common. Well, I'll have that conversation when I get a new offer. Well, sometimes that either doesn't happen because you haven't necessarily built yourself up with the right job search marketing plan, or it does happen, and by that time you're already kind of out the door. And it's a much more tense conversation. So as you mentioned, it's HR director's worst nightmare. Can you share us a little bit why that is the case? Because that's all everybody's assumption. I'll have that conversation when I have the offer.
I would say, because then you're in the reactionary mode, and then honestly, at that point, the employee's like, well, now all of a sudden you're willing to come to the table with these things that you're willing to offer me. Why wouldn't those have been on the table beforehand? And I think a lot of it is about the communication, right? If I didn't know that this was something that you were desiring, then I couldn't have been able to have that conversation with you to say, okay, let's evaluate, let's talk about it. You're bringing it to me at a point where basically it's, it's almost too late. One, because the person's already probably made the decision, right? If they already have the offer in hand, they're halfway out the door anyway. And two, to me, it doesn't come across correctly, right? If you're a company and you're an organization that's truly valuing your employees, these things should be coming up naturally in regular course of business, not at the point where somebody's about to walk out the door. And it's scrambling, trying to figure things out. What can we offer this person? What can't we offer this person? What flexibility do we have? Those sorts of things. So it is a little bit problematic at that point. The other thing I will add, based upon what you were just talking about, is don't assume the grass is always greener somewhere else.
Yep.
And two, starting a new role in a new organization is extremely challenging. So think about that part as well as you're evaluating your options. You can stay with the current organization where obviously you have a lot of familiarity with, a lot more about, I think people take advantage of that. Looking internally is a much smoother transition, whereas starting over at a new organization can be somewhat traumatic, depending upon what changes take place that maybe you weren't aware of. Your commute may be longer, whatever the details might be. But, I've learned that very much so in the last couple of years, just given the market in Houston has been very, roller coaster like, and layoffs and all those sorts of things, that I'm exhausted starting new jobs. And there's nothing I want more than to stay in a role for a significant amount of time, to have that routine and that familiarity. So don't take it for granted that the grass is going to be greener.
Yeah, build your network too, because that's
for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to do that if you're skipping around everywhere. And for those of you tuning in or watching later, what are your questions when it comes to the future of work, remote work, great resignation, career growth, and career advancement as we move forward in this very evolving time? So don't be shy. Feel free to ask those questions. Yvonne, do you have any thoughts about that? I know that based on what I've heard a lot of, people don't feel empowered to ask because they feel blocked at either their direct level management. It's fear-based leadership. The demonstrated actions have either they've asked before or something of that nature, and they've gotten lip service and nothing happened, or it was just they didn't feel comfortable doing that because this individual that they report to has made it very clear that it's not welcome. Right. So then what do they do?
Yeah. So, Erin, in that situation, and when you're going through your process, right, only you know the real relationship that you have with your manager and your direct report. And if it's reached that point, Erin, you may not have a choice but to cultivate a new and different relationship and get your needs met with the new employer. I guess what I would challenge, and maybe it ties more to Julianne, is that sometimes relationships just have an ebb and flow. I think everyone right now is tired. Everyone's a little mentally exhausted. And maybe your manager is just as exhausted as you are. But engaging in this kind of conversation could be that spark that helps the two of you reconnect and reposition how they look at your career, you being the person, and maybe even your manager would be inspired. Hey, Julianne took all this time to think about her development plan. Let me think about mine too. But I'm just thinking about this conversation because if you have to tee up a new relationship with a new employer to ask for what you want, when do you ever learn the lesson that in the moment, in that relationship, you're still empowered to ask for what you want? And I just wouldn't want anyone to leave that lesson on the table and just think that new grass, greener grass, whatever is my answer, when maybe the answer was just in the ask.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's powerful.
And I think that's a good reflection. Do you have to leave to get what you want? Maybe that gives you the kind of courage to ask internally. The other piece I'll add to Yvonne is, your HR business partner is always an ally, right? That's their role, is to kind of be that intermediary. If you find that you're working for somebody who isn't receptive to your requests or desires to develop yourself, then I would definitely reach out to your HR team. Whether it's your business partner or somebody else that within the organization, to just say, hey, I'm really thinking I want to expand my horizons in this capacity. How can I do that? I'm not getting a lot of support from my manager. The other piece I will add is, and I had kind of made a note about this earlier, was, organizations, depending upon size, will have a pretty significant library of learning available to all employees. And this is also a very good time to take advantage of that, to learn about all kinds of things. And that could potentially, again, be another platform that you use to springboard into a new role that fits what you're wanting to do.
Right.
So I just wanted to throw that out there too.
Yeah. And I recommend, if your company has the ability to do so, or has a partnership, to get a work style assessment done, so you know what your strengths and gifts are, what your natural proclivity is, and what drains you and your energy. Because what I find as a coach is we suffer from open door syndrome. We just go from one open door to the next open door, and we let other people plan our careers for us. And then one day we wake up and we realize we're unfulfilled, stressed out, maybe burned out. We're not happy. So it's important to understand what gives you energy, what drains your energy, so you can develop a career path that's authentic to you. And that way, we have a more productive conversation. To Yvonne and Julianne's point, have that constructive, focused conversation, not just go, well, I want something different. Okay, what?
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't really thought about it. Well, maybe you should do that. So I'd like to shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit about remote work and how that is impacting career growth, involvement, networking, because it is, right? Or I thought we were going back into this hybrid work world. And even if that does eventually pan out, it's not really going to happen the way people think it is. Because half or more of the employees will not be there. You'll still be on Zoom. You'll still have to do these things. So with this type of technology dynamic and the natural bias that comes along with someone not being in the office as often as other people, what can those individuals do to make sure they're staying top of mind and being more proactive?
I mean, just a couple of suggestions that come to mind is you make sure you have a regular meeting on the calendar with your team or your boss or what have you, so that you guys can kind of keep tabs on what's happening. I don't know. To me, it seems more prominent now in remote work that, you have conversations with people, but the action items that get taken away don't seem to happen. I've had so many conversations and it's like, okay, you're going to do X, I'm going to do Y. And then it's simple as sending a document. And then a week later, I'm like, hey, I never got that document. The follow through, I think, is becoming harder because you're going from meeting to meeting to meeting on video. You don't have time to sit down and go back through your notes and say, I need to make sure I do these action items. So we're in a position now where we kind of have to make time and space for these things. And so to make sure that you're staying on top of the action items that you had to kind of, again, show that you're working on items, not necessarily proving your work style or what have you, but just to stay on top and be productive and demonstrate your capability is to block your calendars, right? So instead of allowing your calendar to get full of meetings, which tends to be the MO these days, block time on there for your to-do items so that you can be following up on these things and staying top of the workload, which again demonstrates your capability. It, kind of subconsciously, if you will. I'm trying to think of some other things that I've noticed that are different with remote. You kind of lose the social side of things, right? You miss connecting with your team, and how do you still maintain that in even a hybrid environment where, again, to your point, half of you aren't in the office. So, finding the time and again, making sure that it's somewhat spontaneous, but at the same time, you make space for it to hang out with your colleagues. Have a chat. How are you doing? How's the family? What are you guys doing this weekend? Have those kinds of discussions. Don't jump into a meeting right away and get to the topic at hand because you're so, you're going to miss that social aspect, which is important, I think, in our society. As people, we want to connect with others, and it builds that network, right? You build those relationships that way.
Mm-hmm. Yvonne?
Now's the time to do different and think new. And while obviously you want to maintain the current relationships that you have, if you're working from home mostly now, you need to come up with that list of new relationships that you want to start to cultivate, especially if you're transferring your commute time. What are you going to do with the hour at the beginning of the day and the hour at the end of the day that you were normally in the car? And Erin, even just you as an amazing coach, right? Like now's the time where you could be huddling up with your coach, twice a month and having conversations that your workday in the office didn't allow for, or that person that you connected with on LinkedIn, or, that event that you attended, the virtual event. How do you set up a Zoom call with that person? So there's definitely credence to what Julianne's saying. You've got to keep those current relationships going, but we've been given this gift of a little bit more time and flexibility and creativity on how to connect with people. And we need to start taking advantage of those moments.
Yeah. And it's interesting when we were all in the office, in the workspace, we're organically just bumping into one another, having those conversations. And that organic evolution is not there when you're working remotely. So what can you do to recreate that? And I have a great individual on the show, Chris Coltonato, and she's with slipping my mind, an important company. But she mentioned that she focuses on, developing remote workspaces and cultures that thrive in that space. And it's being intentional. It's really all about being intentional. Having that intentional, if you've got an inter-office chat, you see somebody sign on, just send them an emoji or, hey, how was your weekend? Like being intentional about being a casual conversation, basically.
Yeah. Oxymoron, right?
Intentionally casual conversation and just having that chat at the workplace. And you also mentioned the back-to-back meetings and not having breathing space. And that is a big, big issue. Yes. And there was one company who actually has built into their meeting software where it automatically blocks like 15 minutes. So they can't just back to back. But I feel like we need more than just 15 minutes. That's not enough. Because remember, it used to be, my meeting is in such and such building, so I need to make sure there's 30 minutes or an hour to get there. I have to drive. So when there was a space, you would automatically have there. And you knew you just would have to block that space. So if somebody booked me to meet, when I was working for National Oilwell Varco, there was a million different locations all over the Houston metro area and beyond. Oh, well, I have a meeting in College Station. That's half a day.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I can't be at a meeting, while I'm driving there. That's not going to work. So I block my calendar. So maybe we can bring that same thought process into the remote space where we have really kind of allowed our meetings to just not be managed by us. And one of the questions I would have is, do you manage your calendar or to someone else?
I manage it myself, but I don't know that I always manage it with my best self at heart. I still manage it wanting to meet the needs of as many people as I can throughout the day, which when you get to the end of the day means that maybe your needs have not been met and you're having to find ways to sew back into yourself. I will say, Erin, I love that software that you mentioned. I haven't seen it. And if you kind of think back to maybe some old school work science, productivity research, you're supposed to have breaks throughout the day. And
Right.
maybe it is like you have to plan 30 minutes at midpoint of the day and then 15 minutes at the quarters of, the clocks to really just have a moment to reset yourself. And that's not hard to put in your calendar. It's just a matter of making that a standing appointment for yourself. So I think this is a really good reminder of doing that. I've seen companies that have at least tried to take the step of don't schedule meetings on Friday afternoons,
Right.
or Monday mornings are off limits. So you are seeing some micro movements, but that still makes the sprint from Monday afternoon to Friday morning very long and very hard.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I would agree. I manage my own calendar to an extent. I feel like the Outlook is kind of a blessing and a curse because anybody can book a meeting on your calendar and they can see when you're available. So it's like you do nothing and all of a sudden your day is booked, right? So I say I manage it, but obviously it heavily influenced by whoever it is that feels that they need to schedule some time with me, which is great that we have that flexibility. But back to my point earlier, something I've learned early on, and I don't remember at what point in my career I picked this up, is I put my to-do list in my calendar. And then I can decide what shows as free and what shows as busy. So if I have something that I need to put some focused time into, I will put it on my calendar as an action, but I will put it as busy so that people cannot book time. And I've kind of got that reserved. But if I've got just a couple phone calls that I need to make, make a kid's dentist appointment, whatever it might be, and I'll just put that on my calendar and show it as free. And if something happens that, overbooks it, I just move it to the next day, right? And I can control things from a flexibility perspective that I know what do I have to get done versus what maybe I have a little bit of flexibility on, and it just keeps rolling to the next day until I finally get the space and time to do it, which is usually on Fridays. But for me, that has worked pretty effectively. I can keep track of what I need to get done. People can book time as they need to, but I'm not stuck in a rut where every minute of my day is totally scheduled.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So
as
it's
a
been
coach,
helpful.
as a coach, I'll challenge you a little bit though.
Okay.
Those phone calls are just as important.
True. My kids do need to go to the
Maybe
dentist.
those need to be tasked. So here's an interesting cultural brain. It's a mindset we have. So we feel like our life and our career is separate things, and they're not. It is a one thing. It is a one unit. Maybe we'll talk about work-life balance. We're just really talking about life balance because your career lives inside your life.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that, you shut the door in your personal life when you start your 8 o'clock, work schedule. That's not the case. Your life's still there. You're still there. You're a human being. You're still there. So it's how do we blend this in a way that's, honors us as whole, authentic humans. And what I'm seeing is this mindset where, oh, I can't book time because I know that from 9 to 10, I'm most productive and I need to get this project done. Yes, you can book that time as work time that, no one can schedule a meeting there because you need to get things done.
Mhm.
Yes, you can do that. And yes, you can put on your calendar, I need, phone calls and time for that for personal reasons because you're a living, breathing human being. So when we're talking about this work-life balance, that's something that's this paradigm shifted slightly because it really isn't there. It's just one thing. It's not a separate thing. And then shifting our focus to understand, oh, okay, so this is one thing. So then how do we work through that? How do we set our boundaries? How do we honor ourselves in this very new space? Because moving forward in the future of work will be even more blended, not less.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's definitely a challenge. And I think a lot of people fell into different sides of that, right? Some people have a hard time turning the work off, and it's, never ending throughout the day, right? They're in the office at 8 o'clock checking email. And that works for some people because they're like, hey, I've got time and space and I can focus on it because it's quiet. And, if that works for you, great. Maybe during the day, you take an hour to do something that focuses on your home life. You're changing laundry, you're getting dinner ready, you're picking up the kids, what have you. So I think that, one of the benefits that has come out of the remote working life is the blend, right? Where now you can do a little bit of both on both ends of the spectrum, some kind of bleeding more into the other. But at the same time, if you don't know how to control it, it can end up becoming overwhelming.
Yeah. Yvonne, do you have anything to add to that?
No, not to that one. I think we've all taken this very similar journey the past several months. So
Yeah.
Teaching math while,
I know.
attending a conference call.
Exactly.
Listening in it's great English.
But think of how productive you're being. You got two things done at one time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Sometimes we have to. I mean, it's a very crazy world we live in right now because there's so much change, and that puts a lot of stress on us mentally and physically. Because when we're pushed into a strong change cycle, our habits, our routines are evolving, and that's what saves our brain energy. So whenever we're having to change those habits and routines or coming up with new ways of being, it costs our brain mental energy, and we're seeing more emotional exhaustion too as a result of that. So I like to just touch base. So far we've heard a lot about some great insights. And so, hey, reach out to your manager before you just leave. Look for those opportunities within the organization. And if you feel stonewalled, reach out to someone that will be receptive ear to what you want to accomplish, and be specific about your goals. Most importantly, when you do have those conversations, and that's true whether you're looking internally or externally, we need to be specific about our ask. And then also, so remote work, how can you stay top of mind? Be intentionally casual.
Right.
About making, and then being very intentional about those one-on-ones with your management. And my favorite question, whenever I meet someone or growing my network, who's someone that I should know?
It's a good question.
That's a great question to ask. And that starts, particularly if you started work during the pandemic and you've never been in the office, it's always been remote. So you want to be intentional about your outreach and staying top of mind. And then
Julianne is actually expert at that.
Yes, I've started 2 jobs remotely, and I will say my experience with both have been night and day. And it's not a knock on any company, and this is something to think about before you leave your current organization. Starting a new job in a remote environment, I felt like a consultant. I had no kind of connection to the people I was working with, which made me feel like I was on the outside, and I was literally there as a consultant to provide support for a project. And then, when the project was done, it was my time to move on. And my current role has been very different. And I think a lot of it was that intentional connectivity, right? You have to make up for the fact that you're not in an office where you can just casually meet people. And so, again, lesson learned for sure.
Yeah, that's great insight. Thank you for sharing that. So when we're looking I'd like to shift gears again. So when we're our final gear for our panel event today, so when we're thinking about evolving our career and ourselves through this future workspace, what are something that someone can do to make sure that they are evolving based on the future of work? What are hiring managers looking for? Maybe they worked 2 years ago. What are some of the themes that you see there when it comes to the hiring process and and what people are looking for internally that might be different to help people make sure they position themselves wisely.
I go back to that concept of broad capability. There's this new thought about what they call the gig economy, right? Where we really need a workforce that we can internally move around, because that's much more efficient than keep hiring people based upon experience. And this to me is the shift between hiring for experience and hiring for a skill set, right? It's starting to kind of become a little bit more diluted, because in our perspective right now, the hiring market is so tight that if I'm looking for somebody with an X amount of experience, my candidate pool is very limited. But if I'm looking for a skill set, my candidate pool is a lot wider. And it's retraining the minds of an organization to say, don't look at what somebody's done, look at what they're capable of, right? And building out that skill set as an individual is important, right? What is it that you need to know that kind of makes you a little bit more marketable? Your organization can kind of move people from here to there with little impact, right? Because you've got a foundational skill set that is applicable in both areas. And that can be in any environment. You think about somebody working in a warehouse. If you can pick and pack, then you're a much more useful employee than somebody who can just pick. If you're an IT person and you can, and this is probably not the right terminology, but I'm not an IT person, you can write or speak multiple IT languages, you're much more marketable internally and useful to an employer than somebody who can just do one. So I would say that development piece as an individual is stay on top of what's happening in whatever it is that you do, and making sure that you're growing and building that capability so that you can become more useful to your employer, if that makes sense.
Yvonne, what do you think?
Yeah, I think everything Julianne said is spot on. It's just that moment of reflection. So I'm going to walk through this now from the candidate perspective. What's my personal brand? What is it that I'm presenting to an employer as my skill set? So, Julianne mentioned, having the broad scope. You're the all-around athlete, but even all-around athletes have specialties in terms of positions or something that they have a natural bent for. What's your natural bent? And are you articulating that as you're meeting and networking and connecting with prospective employers? What skills have you gained during this time since March of 20? What online trainings have you taken? What's on your to-do list that will upskill you and prepare you for that next opportunity? How do you make that a focus between now and the end of the year? So I think, again, to use your term, Erin, that you used a couple of times, intentional. Now is the time to get intentional about yourself and what you're presenting. You're going to attract exactly the like energy that you're putting out there. What are you putting out there? What are you sharing with an employer? If I were to meet with Julianne, what would be the things that would stand out about her based on her package that she's presenting? And if you don't have a package or you don't know what your package is, that's probably where you need to start.
Right, for sure.
That's true. Very true.
Yeah.
But for any of you tuning in or watching the replay later, particularly for those of you tuning in, we're in the last couple minutes of our special event. We want to make sure that we cover any questions that you have. And if you're watching the replay later, just know you can reach out to us. Pop your comments down below the video, and we will get back to you. We'll be notified, certainly get back to you. And of course, you feel free to reach out to any of us directly, connect with us on LinkedIn, what have you. We'll be happy to help you and your efforts to thrive and elevate your career. So with that being said, what's one thing that I haven't asked that maybe we should talk about before we wrap up?
Wow.
I'm like, wow, that's a tough one. I feel like we've talked about so many things. Let me see if there's anything I had made notes on that we haven't talked about. Here's one that can kind of, again, make you, a little more marketable employees. Get involved. Right? You've got that time back on your schedule now that you're not commuting. And to Yvonne's point that she made earlier, what are you going to do with that time? And I would say get involved, whether it's, mentoring somebody else, maybe that you've got, something you can share to help somebody else in their career, which in turn helps you, right? There's always a double benefit to that type of relationship. Find a BRG internally that you feel, aligns with what you want and where you belong, and join that. And again, that helps build your network. But just, find ways to give back, whether it's community, Getting back to yourself, take some time off if you feel like you're at the point of, burnout. Just do something outside of work that kind of makes you feel better and fills your cup a little bit. So I would definitely recommend that. Also, if you're looking at it from an attractive, trait perspective to a potential employer, being well-rounded, that kind of helps from that aspect as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All great advice, Julianne. I would add to that, try to interact with someone new every week, even if it's via Zoom. Go through those contacts. Now's the time where you say, gosh, if I had time for a coffee chat with that person, who would that person be? And let's do a virtual coffee chat. I would also encourage people to really look at ways to become lifelong learners. And what I mean by that is, the way that you learn, the way that you consume information now is so different. You can listen to a 20-minute podcast while you're walking on a new topic. You can read an ebook. There are just different things that you can do, especially as you're taking your journey to, find your next step or develop yourself in your current role. Just be open to the different channels by which you can do that.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, both of you, for your time, your expertise. I want to give you a round of applause for joining us here in the special event, sharing your insights about remote work, future work. What are you seeing that hiring managers are looking for, how people can best position themselves, particularly during this very strong change cycle. And as you mentioned, when we launched the show, first kicked it off, that we're also figuring this out. So if you're out there and you're feeling a little frustrated because maybe there's not clear expectations set about how you'll show up at work, whether it's remote or hybrid or in person, or maybe things are in flux, just know that this is not something we've ever experienced before. So give your leadership a little bit of space and grace and know that they're going through a lot right now as well. So be present for them, because what I see oftentimes is that unless you are obviously in a toxic issue, which is a little bit different, but what I see oftentimes is people think their leaders have it all figured out and just know they're human beings just like you. So, we're all in this big boat together trying to row through these turbulent waters. So thank you both for tuning in. It's been such a great pleasure again. And thank you all for tuning in. For those of you who are participating or just watching, or if you're watching the replay later, feel free to reach out to us. Until next time, my friends, keep elevating.
Thank you.